Good mythical afternoon. This is Mr. Ayala with another vlog for you. This is Unit 9, the Precedent President. As always, please make sure that you are writing down your notes and that you are viewing this vlog and listening. Because if you are not, it's very difficult for you to understand what's going on. At the end of this vlog, I'm going to give you a question that needs to be put down in the doobly-doo or in the discussion board, wherever it is this year. I don't know. So please kind of be aware of that. The question will not be written. You have to listen to it. And of course, you may either put it on that discussion board as mentioned, or you may write it down and bring it into class. So to start off, Washington is our first U.S. president. He is inaugurated on April 30th of 1789. His vice president is John Adams. And the very first thing that he does as president is he helps Congress pass the Bill of Rights. So from there, we call Washington the Precedent President, excuse me. And we call him that because he's the first in everything. He's the first U.S. president, and everything that he does is going to become part of the presidential tradition. For example, the first thing that he established is the president working closely with Congress. So the president and Congress, so the executive and the legislative branch, are going to work closely together to make laws and enforcement policies that will work for the nation. He also established the use of the cabinet, the tradition of a two-term presidency that was only broke once by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, being neutral in foreign affairs, the idea that the United States should not get ourselves entangled, and established the idea of the presidential farewell address, which we will read in class. So the cabinet. This was one of the very first precedents established by Washington. And what the cabinet's role in government is to give advice to the presidents on various topics. So Washington's cabinet had 4 people in it. The Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson, Treasurer Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of War, which we now call Secretary of Defense, was Henry Knox, and number 4, the Attorney General, aka the lawyer for the presidents and the government, is Edmund Randolph. And what's kind of really interesting is when you really look at Washington's cabinet, you will not see a cabinet that is this strong until Abraham Lincoln's presidency, and then all the way further to actually Barack Obama's is considered the next strongest cabinet during this time period. And we're talking during his first 4 terms of office. And when you look at Washington's cabinet in particular, I mean, you have Thomas Jefferson, the writing of the Declaration, Alexander Hamilton, you know, the guy who creates our economy, Henry Knox, one of the best cannoneers and generals we had during the American Revolutionary War, and Edmund Randolph, who was one of the best lawyers at this time. So when you really look at his cabinet, it's kind of like, you know, everyone else is a pickup game. He's the NBA. Everyone else is kind of, you know, but he is Washington, so he's going to be super awesome because that's what he does. So from there, the next thing that Washington and Congress has to do is establish the federal court system. So what they do is that he helps pass the Judiciary Act of 1789 through Congress. And what this does, this says that states get to keep their individual courts, but also federal courts are going to be put into place on top of the other ones and may be able to reverse the state's court's decision. So this is the idea that we have the state courts down here, and then we have the federal courts up here, and at the very top we have the Supreme Court, who at this time was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would be John Jay, who's that guy right down in the bottom. So from there we get Alexander Hamilton and the economy. So Alexander Hamilton is the Secretary of Treasury under Washington, and there was a lot of issues. So we're going to look at 2 or 3 in particular. The first major issue is the federal and state governments borrowed money to pay for the revolution. So we spent all this money to fight this war, and some states paid it off, other states did not, and the federal government needs to figure out how this is going to work. So their solution is that the federal government take over all the states' debts and allow Congress to control what we call the public debt, or the debt that is owned by our government. So yes, Congress, our legislative branch, has what we call the power of the purse. They have the ability to say how much money we have, where we put that money, and how we borrow money. So if you ever hear about the idea of the debt ceiling discussion or anything like that on the radio or wherever you get your news from, it will kind of give you this idea that, yes, the legislative branch is in charge of it. The president says, I would like to spend this money, and Congress figures out how much money they're actually going to give him or her. And because most of the states like Virginia have already paid off their debt, part of this deal was that they allowed the national government or capital to be situated in a southern state, in particular Maryland. And this way, it makes the southern states not as upset that that a lot of them already paid off their debt, because now they have the capital in their area. So it kind of keeps that balance. Problem 2, the citizens owed lots of debt. So what happened is the United States government under Hamilton and Washington gave out bonds. So they're little slips of paper that are like IOUs. I owe you this much money. And then later, when the government actually has the funding for it, they can go to a bank or to the government and go, hey, here's my bond, and get money back with interest. So from there, we're talking next about the national bank. And at this time, we had a whole bunch of different currencies and banks all over the United States, and that made it very difficult to issue money and very difficult to understand how much each state's currency was worth. So Hamilton wanted this national bank to hold the government's money, to make debt payments to the people that we owe, in particular the French and the Dutch at this time, and to actually issue a currency that was okay anywhere in at this time, the 14 states that we had. Jefferson and Madison are going to oppose this idea because they felt that if you make a government with a bank, that you're going to give too much power to the rich. Because think about this. Who has most of the money in the United States? The wealthy. So the wealthy put their money in the national bank. It's going to mean that these wealthy can persuade the national government and our bank to do certain things that help them. Not the poor farmers or the artisans or, freed slaves or any of those people. It's about who had that money in that bank who can control it. It's kind of like our community banks nowadays. If you are part of a community bank, example, Space Coast Credit Union or any of those credit unions, the people who have money inside of those banks actually control how that bank works. And the national government bank at that time worked the same way. But even though Jefferson and Madison resisted this idea, Congress still passes the bill establishing the bank because we needed some type of control mechanism for interest and for the government, because we could put it in state banks, but then we have more conflicts politically that we're going to have to deal with. Keep that in the back of your mind, because I bet that's going to happen later. Anyway, now to tariffs and taxes. So Hamilton, yet again, wanted higher tariffs on imports and taxes to support the government. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to increase the amount of taxation on goods that come into the United States to support our manufacturing base in the northern states. But the problem is the southern states disliked this. Because if you had so think about it, the southern states, what do they do for their economy? Well, if you forgot, they mostly grow stuff. They don't make stuff. They have cash crops. So most of their stuff that is manufactured is imported. So if you put a high tariff on those imported goods, it's more expensive for the South. While the North wants those high tariffs, because then they can make their goods, and anything that's imported in will be at a higher price, so it will grow the factory system that is developing in the northern states. So, because of the Southern power, because of the 3/5 compromise from the Articles of Confederation in the U.S. Constitution, if you remember that from last time when we spoke about that, only small ones passed because the Southern states had more representation in the House of Representatives because of the 3/5 compromise. One of the major things that they did do, though, was they ended up taxing whiskey, which is going to make the people who live in what we call the West, Kentucky, Tennessee, Illinois, those areas, or what would become those states, very upset because they're growing this corn and they can't get it to market before it just rots away. So they distill it into whiskey and they use that as their main trade. But unfortunately, this is not going to work out. And because of these issues with Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison, we get a split occurring in our government. Jefferson and Madison are worried that the government is becoming too strong and is starting to favor the wealthy. And they end up making their own political party. While you have people like Hamilton and even Adams who liked this idea of having the U.S. government attached with the wealthy, because if the wealthy support your government, they're less likely going to fund a rebellion or try to overthrow your government, which is what happened during our revolution. So we have this balance of who should be in charge. Should it be all the people or the ones with the means and the education and the power to do so? And that whole conflict, we're still having that today. So that's the very end of this. And here's your question for the vlog. What president from the President, aka George Washington, do you think is the most important and why? So please make sure you write that down. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.